Right. Hello, everyone. We're going to talk to you about the role of the captive manager, which is actually quite a lot to cover. There's not very... What's happening? Anyway, it's quite a big topic, so we're going to try and keep it sort of short and sharp, and we're going to switch between each other, because overall we've kind of tried to personalise this into roles as if it was a bunch of individuals. So hopefully the method we've used will be good. Just myself, Richard Parris-Smith. I've been in Guernsey in the captive management market for about 17 years now. And before moving to Guernsey, I was in the London broking market for about 24 years. So if you add those numbers up, or actually if you just look at me, you can tell that I'm going into the 5th year of my career in insurance. So, and the good news is I'm still enjoying it. Adele.
Hi, thanks Richard. So my name's Adele Gale. I'm a director at Robus Insurance Managers in Guernsey. I also, and I'm probably going to carry on starting talking a little bit more about the role, so I also sit as the Deputy Chair of the Guernsey International Insurance Association. So that association, we represent them today. They represent captives, insurers, reinsurers, special purpose insurers, also of course the insurance managers, non-exec directors, and we sort of represent them on the island. And personally, I've co-led the ESG initiatives that the association has brought in Guernsey. So predominantly the ESG framework that we launched and in 2020, and then more recently the kite mark associated with that. So I think it's important to say here that we represent Guernsey, because when you look at the role of the insurance manager, it is very domicile specific. And different jurisdictions have different approaches to regulating that role. For instance, in London, in Jersey, and in lots of other domiciles, it isn't a regulated function. There are service providers, but they aren't independently regulated. In Guernsey, insurance managers are regulated under the insurance manager and intermediary law. And in nearly all circumstances, the insurance manager also acts as the general representative for the captive. So that's the primary point of contact for the regulator. And I think with this dual role, insurance managers are often seen as the eyes and ears of the regulator, almost like the police on the ground. And I think it's important to, and we're going to spend the next 20 minutes, we acknowledge that as a role, but we're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about the much broader role that insurance managers have. I personally see, and I think Rich as well, see a strong correlation between domiciles that have regulated insurance management functions and those that are successful as captive locations. So hopefully we'll help to explore why that is, and maybe you can come to your own decision on that at the end.
Okay, so most of what we're going to talk about is the things people do, i.e. the individual people in your management team. But just to give a bit of context, got some snazzy slides, but not a lot of text on them, so don't worry. So what does an insurance manager do, or what does it provide for your captive insurance company? There's a number of things. The first is it provides a registered office and a physical location, because you're not probably in the same domicile as your captive. So that's a very important function. It's not just, a post box or a brass plate. It's got to have a real physical location with people in it and an address. Secondly, we've got to have systems in your domicile to handle the insurance business and provide financial reporting to the group, to the captive board, and to the regulator. You've also got in-domicile contacts and relationships with local service providers such as legal firms, audit firms, and the blessed banks. You want your manager to keep all those relationships, under taps, as it were. Policies and procedures, you've got to have genuine policies and procedures that are designed for your captive and that meet the processes required in the domicile, from your regulator, from the group, and all of that. So that's a sort of real physical thing that needs to be in place. And then the people. So the team of individuals here who will basically do all the functions that we're going to come on to. And all in all of this sort of physical stuff and the things we all do as managers gives us the physical presence in your captive domicile. In Guernsey, we talk a lot about substance, so you've got to be genuinely located in the domicile. As I said, it's not just a brass plate, it's really your captive doing what captives do. So, our next slide. We're going to start to break this down into individuals. We've identified, I think, something like 10 different roles, as it were, but you probably, well, some captives, Charlotte knows, might have 10 people involved, but it's really a mix and a blend of the different skill sets and experience that will provide you with all these different elements of service, but we thought it was nice to sort of personalise it. So it's really the team that's at the heart of everything that the captive does and pulling all the different bits of the jigsaw together. So the first role we've really identified, and by the way, these images are, if there's any likeness to people in the audience, there's completely coincidental. So there'll be a client relationship leader or leaders, and that's an important role. Forgive me if I look at my auto cue. They've really got to oversee this broad service to the captive in a sort of cradle-to-grave wraparound service. You need a leader of the team to pull together all the different skill sets and basically provide you with the right individuals, but you won't have access to all those individuals all the time because you wouldn't need to, and it would cost you a bomb, and you could as well manage it yourself. So it's really giving you the economies of scale and giving you the right access to the right people at the right time and coordinating all of that. The leaders will also have a broad role in their own captive management firm, and that means they can enable best practice to apply and provide a wider support system of peer review and challenge to your service team. They also provide this conduit to other service providers, like I mentioned the banks and the lawyers and so on, and try to make sure that you're using the most appropriate provider and actually negotiate a good price with them for the service they're giving to the captive. Adele.
Click on. So the next role we want to talk about is the strategic risk advisor role within the captive service team, and I think that this is a role that isn't always recognised by a captive owner, but it's one that's incredibly important for the insurance manager to provide. So this is your annual sense check. What are we trying to achieve? What are the organisation's wider aims around the use of the captive? What are the captive's aims? Are we actually achieving those aims? Is the organisation getting what it needs? Are there other lines of business we could write? Are there other mechanisms that we could employ to either lay off legacy risks so we can take on new risks, to put in place different capital structures, to leverage better investment returns at a group level by loaning back, by looking at other types of more contingent capital, looking at, and more excitingly, looking at new lines of business and new ways to write covers and to give protection. That uninsurable risks, or as Charlotte went through in a lot of detail before, the kind of different uninsurable risks and new risks that captives are getting involved in writing. And it's really important to get the most out of your captive if the strategic risk advisor in the team is aware of the organisation's wider goals. And on a real life basis, I mean, I've been involved in lots of different annual strategy meetings around captives, and you tend as an insurance manager to have a conversation beforehand. You think you probably have a rough idea of the organisation's aims. You put together a few slides, you do some analysis, some analytics, you get into the room with the CFO and they say, oh, that's fantastic, but do you know what really keeps me awake at night is this, and then off you go on a complete tangent, and that's the dream really, to have that kind of interaction at a really senior level so that you can explore ways to actually use the captive to the best advantage. But I've spent a lot of my time making up slides that have been ignored for those types of meetings, I would say, which is great.
So, the underwriter. Really, the function of an underwriter is to work with you and your advisors to make sure they understand and support your group's risk management function and the role that the insurance and the captive play in that. They need to have the skills and experience to assess and price the risk to be retained in the captive, because it should really be written in line with good underwriting principles, but also make sense in terms of the group risk appetite and the captive board's instructions and authority and the agreed strategy. We need to be able to review and prepare underwriting proposals and recommendations that the parent buys into and wants to use the captive for, but also that the board of the captive, or indeed the board of the PCC, if it's a cell captive, will approve and be happy with and understand. They need to understand the technical requirements of the captive insurance programme, including any reinsurance protections that are bought to cap the exposure of the captive. They need to draft or review and execute policy and reinsurance documentation. They need to establish and oversee processes for handling claims and reinsurance recoveries. And they need to maintain, analyse and report relevant underwriting statistics. And there's the old feedback loop that Charlotte recognised, where you actually gain experience in statistics and feed them back to the parent that feed into the whole risk management process. And then the critical function.
So I'm a chartered accountant, so this is very much my comfort zone. So the accountant on the team's not only got to make sure they're processing the debits and credits, making sure that everything kind of hangs together, preparing management accounts and information. They're also looking at the solvency computations, preparing financial statements, managing the audit process, group reporting, managing the group reporting audit process, liaising with the tax team at group, filing local tax returns, and sort of taking care of the nuts and bolts of the accounting function. But I would say there's two kind of key things that the insurance manager should be ensuring, as the accountant should be ensuring that they're making sure the captive board are aware of. And that's kind of developing an understanding and a way to communicate to perhaps non-financially minded individuals the sensitivities around solvency or around capitalisation options. So understanding that the accounting standards require a specific reserving policy, how that reserving policy will be implemented, and if we have an increase in claims by this amount, how does that impact your solvency ratio? So if an additional claim reserve of $1 million creates a threat to your ideal capital solvency ratio of say 130%, you want your accountant to be able to articulate for you, oh, that's a 5% sensitivity there, so that the captive board can make real life decisions about the types of risk they make and don't fall foul of regulations. I think also on the asset side, it's really important that the accountant is really on the button when it comes to the regulatory solvency assessment, and is able to tell you that if you mix up your asset portfolio in a slightly different way, you're able to leverage greater return, and having investment managers invited into board meetings is definitely, as Richard was saying before, having those relationships so that the right people are having the conversations with the captive board about what they can do on their asset side, but then also understanding what that means for the regulatory assessment and for the financial reporting, so that nobody is surprised by anything in the financial realm, really is what does. And also the accountants really have a role to keep things as light touch as possible. I think captives don't pose a huge amount of risk to the financial system as a whole. So, as an example of something the association in Guernsey did, we lobbied the regulator to reduce the IFRS disclosure accounting required in captive financial statements. So this allows captives in Guernsey to report very light touch IFRS financial statements. The group consolidation can happen easily, but without incurring a lot of cost in domicile in financial statements really that aren't massively meaningful to the group on a kind of holistic basis. So I think that kind of lobbying effort is also important within the accounting role, not to sort of play it up too much. Obviously, I think accountants are incredibly important, but the strategic side of things really, and the underwriting side is really where we need to be adding value, not a sort of cottage industry of increasing disclosures.
17 years of captives I'm still not an accountant, glad to say. That sort of moves on smoothly to the function of Treasury, which is all about ensuring the efficient handling of monies that flow through the captive. Obviously, we'll bend over backwards to tell you that we're not investment advisors, but we do hope, and we should be looking to engender discussion, provide general feedback and market intelligence in order to help ensure that the captive does indeed try to adopt a positive investment approach for the funds that are going to be sitting in it. Very rarely aggressive or anything like that, and it's the board's, it's ultimately the board and the parents group, but it's just, there's sometimes quite a lot of money sitting there, so it's trying to be a bit active in that. And then obviously the day-to-day stuff, opening bank accounts, or month to month, year to year, because it's not the easiest of things, handle cash receipts and disbursements, taking care of all cash handling functions really, maintaining bank accounts, including signing mandates and all the payment approval processes. There's a fair bit involved, and carrying out investment instructions under the direct instruction of the board. Administrator. Yeah, so not a massively exciting role, but incredibly important. Just processing premiums, claims, making sure reinsurance is paid on time. Quite often we do a fair bit of cash reporting for a group basis, just to kind of facilitate monthly management account type information at a group level, maintaining bank accounts, reconciling, and general kind of administrative support and assistance. I think probably covers it. Okay. So I've drawn the straw of talking about these positions. Money laundering reporting officer, compliance officer, and actually the whole compliance position. Very important roles. They tend to be defined roles. For instance, in Guernsey, the MLRO, MLCO, and compliance officer all have certain defined requirements attached to them, actually quite onerous. But the role basically encompasses ensuring that the captive will fulfill the statutory requirements of all the sort of relevant laws, companies laws, insurance laws, data protection, financial crime, bribery, terrorism, and all the other gamut of laws that we have to think about these days. They need to maintain a deep, up-to-date understanding of the domicile's laws and regulations. They need to monitor, report, and plan the response to changes in legislation, changes in regulations and corporate governance requirements. And, certainly over the last decade, that's been a pretty full-time job. And I think most captive managers now have teams, compliance teams, rather than just an individual or embedded into the day-to-day captive team, because it's a very important function. Going a bit further than that, they would look to establish, pro formas, procedures, and policies so that the captive can operate really efficiently while still making sure it's fulfilling all its obligations. And they need to prepare and file any reports that are required under those laws and jurisdictions. So that's that in a nutshell. and then the next is the general rep.
Yeah, so I sort of mentioned at the start, the general rep is the single point of contact for the regulator in respect of each licensed entity, so in respect of the captive. In Guernsey, we have a portal, and it's the general rep that has the login to that portal and submits the returns, notifications, responds to requests within the portal for information, will be the person the regulator pick up the phone to if there's a perceived problem, if there's an inspection, if there's something they just want to talk about. And as I mentioned before, the insurance managers are predominantly or nearly always also appointed as the general rep as a corporate, not as an individual role. And that kind of allows us to be seen really as the eyes and ears of the regulator. But it's really important that the general rep is collaborative in their approach as far as is possible within the limitations of the regulated nature. So you would expect your insurance manager to be discussing correspondence that's received from the regulator in respect to your captive with the board of directors and agreeing a collaborative response to that. So it's definitely not, it's the general rep reports to the regulator, but it does so on behalf of the board as well as on behalf of itself. And it's really important that that collaborative approach is taken by your insurance manager to the extent it can, which is, almost in all cases, I would say.
Agreed. Company secretary. I've only got 2 bullets on this, but actually it is an important role. So it's a question, most captives will have at least 3, in some cases dozens of meetings every year. And as it's an insurance company, but also a strategic tool for the group, the topics discussed in those formal board meetings and underwriter committee meetings can be quite wide-ranging. And they've all got to be minuted, they've got to be arranged, papers are organised for them, and the minuting is a really significant, I think it's quite a challenge actually, and a good manager needs to be able to provide minutes on time, accurately, but also that when they're read in 5 years' time and you're trying to think, why the hell did we do that, will remind you of the key factual discussions and the decision points in it. So I hats off to the COSEC element of what we do. They need to prepare and maintain corporate documentation as well, corporate records that need to be sort of strictly kept under various laws and regulations.
And then the final role, the role of the actuary, and quite often this is a third-party service provider. A lot of insurance managers have actuarial departments within their wider firms, but in any case it's usually sort of seen as a third party almost. So obviously data is provided, that's analysed, and then what comes back is best estimates of reserving, scenario testing, stress testing, whatever you scope, I suppose, as well as justification for the premium rates, if that's also a task that you want the actuaries to perform for you. And it's really important that your insurance manager is empowered to challenge the outputs from the actuarial analysis, and that as a board you're set up to be able to also provide that challenge. Obviously, actuarial analysis is an exact science, but there's not always just one outcome. There's a whole range of outcomes, and for insurance managers to fully understand the risk the captive's writing and present that to the actuaries accurately and with the appropriate narrative and understanding is absolutely fundamental to be able to get a good quality output in terms of reserving recommendations that kind of everybody can feel comfortable with. So our final slide, in Guernsey, just as a statistic, only 1% of the captives in Guernsey, we have 291 captives in Guernsey, and only 1% choose to go self-managed. So pretty much everybody chooses to appoint an insurance manager. And Guernsey has a regulated insurance manager function. So as an employer, as directors of insurance managers in Guernsey, we also face up to the regulator and have to maintain our licence. And I think that's what makes Guernsey a very successful captive domicile. I think it's probably what puts Guernsey people in front of you today, that we have an insurance management function as opposed to captives looking to self-insure. So Hopefully those slides have helped to illustrate that. If you have any questions, I think we might have 1 minute or not.
We're doing okay.
Okay, we'll keep questions to the end. Great. So handing over to Adrian.